All right, we are now recording. Welcome to another edition of Mondays with Manny. My name is Manny Rodriguez. It is March 2nd, 2020, and I have the great honor to be joined with Edward Blackman joining me today. Thank you, Edward, for joining me. I'm going to let Ed do some introduction here in just a second for himself and what he's doing out in the world, making a positive difference in the workplace. But as always, just a little explanation of Mondays with Manny. So we're going to do 20 to 30 minutes talking about some common challenges in the workplace and how to solve them using behavioral science and other science-based solutions. We are recording this, so those that cannot join us in Mondays with Manny live, we will be putting this on YouTube and socializing this across social media all over the place. And of course, these 20, 30-minute videos are always sponsored by Business Science Magazine and 305 Publishing and the OBM Alliance. So kudos to our colleagues there. And last but not least, for those that are joining us in the live session, thank you very much for joining Edward and I today. We're looking forward to speaking with you. At the tail end, we will do a live Q&A with all those who join us live. And we won't record those because those are very special moments for those that join us live. So without further ado, thank you very much and welcome to Mondays with Manny. And again, I am joined with Edward Blackman, continuous improvement expert extraordinaire and behavioral scientist. So I'm not going to be able to do justice to Edward. I want Edward to go ahead and introduce himself. So give us the elevator pitch. Ed, tell us all about yourself.
Thank you, Manny. I appreciate the invitation. My background by education, I had an undergrad degree in psychology and mathematics, master's degree in behavioral science. Then I went into the field, and I've been working in the field for 20 years now. So originally I was the guy that people would send to go fix something, and then they wanted me to start teaching them how to fix it themselves. And then I turned into the guy that would set up systems of improvement and start transforming organizations. So I've worked as an internal consultant and external consultant for quite a while now, 2 decades. So I found that the mix of behavioral science and continuous improvement works really well together from a complementary standpoint.
All right, and so you mentioned a couple of things, Ed, and I want to pick on that. And this is less of an interview; it's more of a conversation. So we'll skip the interviewing part in just a minute. But I thought it'd be good for the audience. You highlight a couple of things. You mentioned a couple. You've worked for internally and externally as a expert, as a change expert. So if you wouldn't mind, let's do a little selfish plugging of the different companies you work for, and then we'll talk about continuous improvement.
Sure. So right now I'm working for Kelda Consulting, KELDA Consulting.com. And it's a fabulous organization. We do consulting nationally and internationally. There's also authorship, 305 Publishing and Business Science Magazine for some of our articles, as well as teaching engagements and events.
All right, fantastic. Well, and I'm going to put all of that information about Kelda Consulting, the website. I'll put that up on the screen. You'll see that momentarily, and then you'll be able to access that in our channel feed in the links below. And then, so Ed, we talked about continuous improvement. You mentioned continuous improvement. And so there are probably people in this audience that know very well what continuous improvement is. However, I'm going to go out on a limb and say there's probably some people that it's new information, new territory. So Ed, I thought it'd be cool if we have just kind of a chat from our different perspectives of life and our different walks of life. What is continuous improvement? So you're the knowledge expert, so I'll let you go first, and then I'll kind of share my own 2 cents. So tell the audience, what is continuous improvement?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. It actually comes up quite a bit. It's funny how our fields don't really talk to each other. They're very similar paradigms. So behavioral science and continuous improvement, yet we don't learn enough from one another. Mm-hmm. And so from my experience working with organizations, one of the number one questions that always comes up is, why does this person do this? Well, right. It turns out there's a lot of answers based on the lens that you're using to answer the question. So if you're using a behavioral science lens, you might give one answer. If you're using a continuous improvement lens, you might use another. For me, I use continuous improvement as an umbrella term. So it includes things like lean, Toyota production system, sometimes Six Sigma, agile methodologies that are very if you will, new, used originally with IT, but now expanding into other administrative spaces as well. So for me, that all fits into the continuous improvement mindset, including quality improvement.
Yeah, and it's such a cool space, and I think it's so well done in the structure of what's referred to as continuous improvement. You mentioned some things like lean and Six Sigma, right, and agile. The one that I'm most familiar with probably is a methodology that's been adopted in the world of sustainability called Plan, Do, Check, Act, right? That model around making sure that we always plan, we check what we plan, we act on what we planned and checked on, and then plan, do, check, act, right? And so, and it's a nice model, right? It's almost overly simplistic in some respects, but it is a nice model, and it gets people kind of really thinking about continuous improvement. You're always planning, doing, checking, and acting. Plan, do, check, act. Plan, do, check, act. But there's the little bit, in my opinion, there's always like a lack of a scientific rigor in plan, do, check, act, where you got to add in some of our methodology. So I was curious. I would love to pick your brain for the audience sake. What do you find are some of like the most common challenges in organizations when they're trying to implement continuous improvement?
Yeah, and the cycle that you just mentioned is actually a perfect jumping off point. So it's called the Deming cycle, or the Shewhart cycle was actually the original creator of it, and it's called PDCA or PDSA.
Mhm.
Plan, Do, Study, Act is another version of it, but it basically is just the scientific method, right?
Mhm.
I have an idea, I want to test it out. Let's study or check the results, and then adjust based on that. So instead of, if you will, hey, I'd love to implement this software or this great new process. Let's do it across the entire corporation, company wide, all of our clinics, all of our manufacturing sites. Well, no, scientific approach would be, I have this idea. Let's try it in one small place, see what the results look like, and then adjust based on those results, and then do it more incrementally.
Mhm.
And from the cycle standpoint, there's a lot of ways that can go wrong,
Right.
but it's a nice fractal. And from that perspective, the fractal is small or large. So if you're a frontline worker and you have a small idea for improvement, test it out using that cycle. Or if you're the CEO of an organization, I want to try out a new strategy. Well, you do the same cycle. So it fractals up and down the same way. It's the same design.
Mhm. So, in terms of like some examples maybe, or even, yeah, so let's start with some examples. So like, for me, the most common example that I've seen with plan, do, check, act, or even lean, is regarding process engineering work, right? So they have huge specs for improving processes in a manufacturing facility, and however, as good engineers would, they want to apply some good rigor, and they're not really 100% sure that's the right solution, so they're going to test it, and they're going to plan, they're going to do, they're going to check, they're going to act. They're only going to act if the plan, do, check makes sense, right? If they test it all out. I'm oversimplifying, of course, but then when they go from a lean perspective, or even a Six Sigma perspective, there's a lot of data that they collect to make sure that all the math works out, right? All the engineering specs works out. So I know that from a process engineering standpoint, I've used it, I've seen it a lot, and I've applied it a lot. Can you give us an example from your perspective outside of like manufacturing that might kind of lend itself to a broader audience?
Yeah, and that's one of the focal areas I've worked on, is trying to translate this into the administrative space, which tends to be more difficult for people. One of the fundamentals of continuous improvement is learn to see, then learn to fix. Right.
Oh,
And so in the manufacturing floor, it's really easy to see the process, to see the assembly process, the manufacturing process, the welding, painting, all that. You can actually see it, observe it, and then collaborate with peers on, hey, did you see that? Is that what's really going on? And confirm the facts. In administrative space, it's a lot of it's in your computer. It's hard to see the workflow, the process, what's occurring. To me, that's actually where behaviorists fit in beautifully, because we're able to do direct observation and see and observe behaviors in a way that others without the training and background can't, and then provide those facts and insights. So one example is, okay, well, let's roll out this new strategy. So we heard this approach to new product development works better than this old approach. Great. And an example of that, a concrete example is IoT, Internet of Things.
Right.
So let's say we want to connect our microwave to our iPhone. Okay. How do we do that from an actual company perspective? The producer of the IoT, the app, all of that. The traditional approach would be siloed, right? Well, we produce the microwave over here. We produce the app over here. They're separate teams, obviously. You know, microwave design and assembly and app design and assembly and integration are completely different. So let's design them separately. Let's build them, and then at the end, just connect them together. Right? Sounds simple enough. Well, no, that's not a systems perspective. And where we look at that from a CI perspective or continuous improvement is a value stream. Right? No, let's look at all the handoffs that are happening. Let's look at the integration points and try it out. Now,
Yeah.
from a PDCA perspective or a low experiment perspective, you could have an entire suite of products. So let's say we have microwaves, washing machines, dryers, furnaces, you know, all these different products, and you say, okay, let's roll out this new process with all of our products. Or no, let's test out the new process with just one product and see how that goes and adjust, and then move to another product and another product incrementally.
Yeah. These
So
are
in the agile perspective, to put another lens on it, they call it waterfall versus agile. Honestly, so waterfall is big bang, you deploy it everywhere. Agile is incremental.
okay. And of course, in behavioral science, we would probably advocate for incremental, right? Because then we can test, validate the data with the data, right? In behavior analysis, they call it a multiple baseline approach, right? So you take baseline, you test, and then you go to the next group or the next location or whatever, or the next set of behavior and outcomes, right? A lot of companies don't like that approach. That's a snail's pace approach, they say. But it's more scientific, isn't it? It's applying more scientific rigor, I think. Um, and,
Yeah, do you mind if I build on that point for a second?
sure, sure.
So I think that's actually one of the biggest failure modes that both fields have, behavioral science and continuous improvement, is that length of the baseline, right?
Yeah,
So how long should we be taking data, right? And no, we gotta fix things now. You don't understand. There's all these fires are going on. My iceberg is melting right now. I need
right.
to change this right now. I don't think those are mutually exclusive decisions.
I agree.
Why can't we run an experiment in a day? What are the barriers in our system, the impediments that prevent us from running an experiment the same day, right? It doesn't have to be a year. It doesn't have to be 3 months.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. I find it interesting. There's more in the business literature around what you're describing, right? That there is such thing as you need practical solutions for practical matters in a practical time frame, and so it's less about you can apply scientific rigor without the need for an extensive baseline of methodology. So I completely agree with you. I know that in some manufacturing settings, we used to say take a day to test, right, and collect some data and and test your solution in a day. And the reason is because there was so much data in a manufacturing facility by hour, you can actually do that. Where maybe less hourly by hourly jobs, you probably need a little bit lengthier time, but that doesn't mean you should wait on the solution. If you have a solution and you have some good historical data, give it a shot, try it out, see what happens, right?
Yeah. And
Um,
this was where naturalistic studies can come into play as well. So a naturalistic study wouldn't hold up to the standards of a lot of scientific journals. I don't give a rip. Business world, we actually have to find out a more effective way of doing something. So if you have existing data, pre-existing data on how something is going better in one area than another, why not use it, right? And so the I think the popular term used for this is positive deviant, right?
mhm.
So if we have somebody that's a deviant in a positive way, they're performing, outperforming other individuals, their peers, in a positive way. Let's study that. Let's look at the data that supports that, and then do direct observation and try to come up with ideas on why they're a positive deviant, right?
I love it.
What was it? Dr. Brethauer used to call them exemplars. right? Exemplary performance.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yep.
So look for exemplars in there. And it turns out there's typically in the administrative settings, there's an abundance of data that we could use already. We just have to take a few moments to look at it.
Yeah, I remember a colleague of ours, right, Dr. Tim Ludwig, right? Tim used to say, you know what performance improvement is all about? It's just minimizing the variance. Minimize the variance. If you can minimize the variance, you're going to accelerate performance exponentially, right? And sometimes all he would say is, you know what? Data you should look for the variance, right? Look for the exemplars, look for the average. Where's the variance, right? How big of a delta is it? And I always thought that was like a nice nugget, you know, like a nice piece of advice to give any manager, any executive who's really kind of struggling with where to begin with performance improvement or performance management. It's like, look for the variance, look for the delta, right? So how big of a delta is it? Look for those exemplars or what you call the positive deviance, right? And then look for the variance. I want to take a step back. You mentioned something earlier that I wanted to make sure we touched on with the audience today. So you mentioned value stream mapping, right? So you mentioned value stream mapping, and for sake of discussion, you know, I've had the great pleasure to watch you in action in a couple of organizations, and then we visited one together who's doing a great deal of this work, right? Continuous improvement work, and the work that you've done. And one of the things I've noticed, and you mentioned it with regards to value stream mapping, was the handoffs and the amount of players that are really involved in continuous improvement, right? Cross-functionally, organizationally, et cetera. So I was just wondering if you could give some advice or some tips to the audience here around when it comes to continuous improvement, right? So what are some of the kind of the top three or so practices with regards to getting people involved, maximizing, leveraging the strength of numbers, in relation to continuous improvement, value stream mapping, all the things you've already talked about, because it's in there. I know it's in there because you've done it, and the positive impact with regards to the organizational impact that you've had that I've seen is great. So I just thought maybe I can put you in the hot seat for a minute and just say, when it comes to continuous improvement, value stream mapping, getting people involved, like here's some best practices I think you should consider. What would you say?
Okay. And so I appreciate all the compliments, by the way. So I'm going to say this is for my CIA peers. This is where I'm going to sound like a bit of a heretic, but so be it. I think that people can come up with the best, greatest solutions all by themselves, and then they find out that they're completely undeployable and junk when you add one more, this thing called a human being, to the conversation, right? So I think it's a really poor idea to develop ideas and improvements in isolation. No, you're part of an organization. You have peers. There are other individuals who have expertise that they can add. And so involve the team in idea generation and deployment. And so let's talk with other humans. One part of involving them is making things very simple so that we're using the same language and we have the same, if you will, and I'm sorry for my behavioral science brethren, mental models. I'm not a huge fan of the term, but if you think about what leaders mean when they talk about mental models, it's just the view they're giving, right? And so the analogy I like for this one is, let's say I have a headache. Well, if I talk to a dentist, they're going to advise me on my teeth. And somebody might call that a mental model or a lens for doing problem solving. If I talk to a chiropractor, they're going to talk to me about adjusting my spine, right? And so on. So if you look at things from different lenses or different focal points, you have different ideas for improvement. Well, if you involve a group of individuals, you have a lot of viewpoints. And so those tend to normalize a bit and feed into one another. Plus, if the people that you involve in generating an idea are part of the deployment, then you also overcome another huge barrier. So this is a great idea that this team developed in isolation. Now we want everybody else to run with it, right? So, Manny, how would you feel if I show up and say, you know what? That color of that bookcase just isn't doing it for me. So here's the color that you should use for your bookcase.
Yeah.
And you're going to tell me the appropriate place I can put my can of paint. And so, no, I have no right to tell you what to do with your space. But if I involve you in picking out the paint, right, then, we're overcoming that resistance to change, which honestly, I think is a bit of a misnomer as well. So people aren't resistant to change. Their resistance is to being changed. If you involve people in it, they're much more likely to implement the idea because they were part of creating it. And so these are basics, simple things, but basic concepts, but it applies to things like value stream mapping. And value stream mapping, to talk like a heretic for CI, is just simply, I have a need to the need is met. So I need my microwave connected to the internet to it is connected. I need a washing machine to I have a washing machine. I need a new software system implemented to it is implemented. Things like that. And so there are value streams at the mega level for an overall organization, or there are internal value streams, right? So you're doing a handoff from HR to finance, or the reverse, right? We call those services. So every service has a value stream, and every value stream has a health. Well, how healthy are our services? So if I'm the finance team and I produce 12 different reports, let's just say for the sake of argument, those are 12 different services. They have different customers. They provide different needs at different levels in the organization. Mm-hmm. Which of those are going well? Which of those are not? And so we call those stoplight reports. We have KPIs that we use in continuous improvements. They fall under 5 basic categories: safety, quality, delivery, cost, and people/morale. And so those 5 basic introductory indicators are used to show or depict the health of any service that we're providing. So those 3 paradigms that I'm talking about, or those tools, can help a team, and it should be a team, to figure out, diagnose, and assess and improve their actual services, right? So what are the services I have? What are the value streams that support those services? And then what are the health of those services? And if the health of those services from a stoplight perspective are red, yellow, or green. And from an improvement perspective, a stability perspective, okay, the ones that are red, those are the ones that we get the team to focus on improvement. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And so once they see red, or once they get one of those indicators, the next step would be some form of an action plan with a set of solutions, right? And they would then go back to the plan, do, check, act, right? So they would plan it, check, do it, check it, and act on it, right? Is that about right?
Yeah, that's correct. But unfortunately, that's where a couple more struggles pop in. So, we see red. Let's book a conference room and brainstorm ideas for improvement.
Right.
No, man, no. In the manufacturing plant, you do direct observation, right? So this is where you get behaviorists or somebody with a good solid CI background, and they do a thing called a Gemba walk, which is Gemba is called the real place. It's a Japanese term, and it's where you directly observe the process. Mm-hmm. And then you generate ideas based on the struggles that you see people having in the manufacturing plant. In the administrative space, it is more difficult because it's harder to see. So this is where you'll use things like what's called a Kanban, Kanban, and it's a way to visually depict the process. And so once you do that in association with direct observation of the process, because humans are involved, it's not all completely automated, mm-hmm. Then you can actually start to diagnose and assess and still come up with ideas for improvement. I'll throw out a basic example here. I was working in an insurance setting, and they were trying to reduce the amount of time it took to produce a report for finance, right? It was underwriting, working with finance. And so we mapped out the steps after direct observation, and we found out that one of the steps involved printing off an Excel spreadsheet and then sending it in interoffice mail over to finance, and they would do stuff with it. Okay, so let's go observe over in finance. Do you ask questions, basic interviewing things with no judgment, just, what happens? Tell me, please describe it. And you're taking notes the whole time and showing a lot of deep respect to the people doing the work. And so we asked the finance team, what do you do when you get this report? Oh, we enter it into Excel. Okay. Do you guys potentially email this report around? Oh, no, we can't email it. Why can't you email it? Well, If we email it, people can easily change the numbers, and we don't trust that the numbers won't get adjusted. Right, but aren't you transposing the numbers from a printed off sheet back into one? Yes, but we trust this process better than just emailing around a spreadsheet. And so honestly, I'll tell you, we were not able to overcome that barrier. We did not prevent them from just emailing it around to each other and switching out the paper process. The brilliant idea that we had for improving that process, interoffice mail took 3 days. And guess what? The departments were on the same floor in the same building. So the brilliant new idea was literally we saved 3 days just by having them walk it to the other end of the building. But you know, it sounds strange and it sounds extremely simplistic. It's amazing how many processes get improved with simple ideas. And for goal setting, particularly when we talk about strategy, I like to say the idea is if we don't understand baseline data, we either half the bad or double the good. So if it takes 30 days, let's get it down to 15. If the quality issues that we have are at 80%, let's get them up to 90%, or depending on which direction you measure quality, things like that. So, but the gains are huge doing these basic things.
Oh yeah. Well, it's not, there's an one of the operating philosophies in behavior analysis and in other disciplines as well is the law of parsimony, right? Which usually is the simplest solution, is usually the best solution. And then of course there's the one rule, the 80-20 rule, which I'm not really fond of myself, but it kind of makes sense in a way, 80% of the problems are solved by 20% of the solutions of the world, which, there's arguments for it, I'm sure, but I'm not a big fan of it. It's not very scientific in my book, but it is what it is. Some people like it, but I do like the law of parsimony. I like what you're saying, Edward, a lot. So I want to be cognizant of, Mondays with Manny. We want to make sure it's 20, 30 minutes long. We're doing great, by the way. We're doing great time-wise. I wanted to, so with the world of continuous improvement, there's so much literature out there. One of the things that I've been very much a fan of is sharing with the audience here, a couple of key resources that they should pick up and run with and read on their own. Do you have any advice on some resources, some books, some literature that people should pick up and read with regards to continuous improvement?
Certainly, and so give a few options here. If you're a bibliophile and you like books, then there's two. The Toyota Way to Lean Leadership by Jeff Liker is, if you have zero background in continuous improvement, it's a really good book. It's a great, honestly, leadership book that also happens to be based on continuous improvement. If you're in HR or if you consider yourself a learning organization, then the classic article, Learning to Lead at Toyota by Stephen Spear, Dr. Spear. It's a 5-pager HBR article, Harvard Business Review. It's excellent. I've read that thing several dozen times. It's a great way to talk about how do you improve experimentation and innovation within an organization.
Cool.
There's a website, lean.org, lean.org. And a ton of free material and videos on there. And then the last one I want to give a huge plug to is if you want to do anything with strategy, this is the best book I've ever read, and I've read a lot of books on strategy, Getting the Right Things Done by Pascal Dennis. And it talks about, and you probably even saw on the cover, the PDCA cycles, the feedback cycles, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
How to constantly check and adjust based on the feedback of your strategy and how it's going well or not going well.
All right. Well, thank you, Ed. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to be putting, you would have seen, and those who are watching the recording, you would have seen the links provided on the screen as he was describing that. And then for those in the live audience, we'll share it again once we press stop recording. We'll share those resources one more time, put it in the chat feature when we're talking to you in our live Q&A. Edward, I really appreciate you joining me today. It was a lot of fun. We talked about a lot of cool stuff, and that's what this is all about, just kind of disseminating some cool science, helping some people out with some common problems that that they're working through. And continuous improvement has a great deal of wealth of tools, technology, and science behind it. So it's just great stuff. So thank you very much for joining me. And for those that are watching Mondays with Manny, thank you very much for listening and watching. And stay tuned for next time. And until then, see you soon. Thanks, Ed. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.